What if you could sort of listen in on life in two European cities way back? Not through dry records, but, through the eyes of writers actually living there.
That's exactly what we're doing today.
We're taking a deep dive into these really unique literary snapshots. Timisoara and Arad, 1890.
Yeah, think of it like peeling back layers of history.
Hmm.
We've got these two fascinating portfolios. They came from the Hungarian Salon, which was a Budapest magazine covering literature and culture back then.
Right, not dusty academic papers, but real impressions from the ground.
Exactly.
And our guides for this, Robert Tabori and Carolee Mary Horvath. Tabori first, he was a journalist, right? Saw a bit of the world, Vienna, Berlin.
Hmm.
And then he was editing the Delma Garasaki Kozloni in Timisoara. That international background, that must have given him a certain perspective.
Oh, definitely. I think it probably gave him this comparative lens. He could see Timisoara and maybe draw parallels, notice things someone more local might just take for granted.
Makes sense. And the other writer, Mary Horvath, he came from a different angle. Natural sciences, fine arts, then social issues later on. He edited Arad as Videk.
Right, so maybe more analytical eye, but focused on the social fabric, perhaps.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. So our mission today basically is to pull out the key insights from these two accounts. What was the urban story, the social vibe, the culture in Timisoara and Arad through their words.
It's like a shortcut, really. A way to get a feel for that specific moment in time, see what forces were shaping these places.
Okay, let's dive into Timisoara with Tabori. He kicks things off calling it Little Vienna. What does that immediately tell you?
Well, Little Vienna, it positions Timisoara right away as aspiring, right? Aiming for that kind of imperial feel, that modernity.
Like a mini capital.
Exactly. He points out the planning similarities, the ramparts, the barracks, but also, the promenade starting to develop. It suggests they were consciously trying to copy Vienna's model.
But it wasn't quite working perfectly. He mentions Timisoara felt more like four cities, not really connected.
Right, and that's a key observation. These physical barriers, they weren't just inconvenient. They actually hindered communication between districts.
What kind of impact would that fragmentation have?
Well, it probably made it harder to build a single, unified city identity. And you might get, different levels of development, different social scenes in each part.
Like that story he tells about the person from Josephine who didn't know Gambetta.
Exactly. It sounds funny, but it really shows how separate these areas were. People in the same city not even sharing basic cultural reference points.
Hmm. Then he gets into this whole Hungarianization thing. He says the city was becoming Hungarian, but then lots of good Hungarian patriots only spoke German. That sounds like a contradiction.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? It shows that national identity back then, it wasn't just about language. Not always.
So you could feel Hungarian politically or culturally, but still live your daily life in German.
Precisely. Maybe due to habit or business or social circles. And Tabori actually points to who was pushing the language shift. The phalanx, he calls them. County officials, landowners, young professionals, especially priests, they were the drivers within the system.
Interesting. And the military. Timisoara was a big military town. How did that fit in?
Ah, yes. The large officer corps definitely shaped social life. Tabori mentions they helped keep the German theater going, for instance.
So the military presence actually maybe slowed down Hungarianization in some ways, or complicated it.
It complicated, absolutely. It brought its own cultural influence. For some families, keeping up German ties through the military might have had social advantages, acting as a sort of counterweight to just switching entirely to Hungarian. Shows how outside forces impacted local language use.
And socially, he saw these distinct circles, aristocratic, bourgeois, national, not really mixing much, even with newspapers and clubs around.
Yeah, it suggested even if you had the places for public life, the social reality was still quite segmented.
Like different worlds operating side by side.
Pretty much. Hindering a truly integrated city culture, despite the stats looking lively on paper.
Okay, and one more specific group he mentions, the Kurids of Iosifin, the German inhabitants there. They resisted both German and Hungarian language efforts. What's that about?
That's really intriguing. It could suggest a very strong, very specific local identity. Maybe they saw themselves primarily as Josephine residents above broader German or Hungarian affiliations.
Like a kind of local resistance, keeping their own culture distinct.
Could be. A way to maintain some autonomy against these bigger national pressures.
So when Tabori sums up the cityscape, the trees, the separate neighborhoods, the theater, the busy center, then the barracks, and contrasting that with the fabric district, the Little Manchester. What's the big picture he's painting?
It's a picture of contrasts, I think. A city with multiple identities sort of crammed together, not always fitting smoothly. You've got the planned imperial center bumping up against this raw industrial energy. It feels like a city in flux, maybe struggling to make sense of itself.
And he finishes with that bit about autumn, quite lyrical and romantic. Why slip that in?
Well, it adds a personal touch, doesn't it? It reminds you that this wasn't just an abstract analysis. It was a place people lived in, felt things about. It makes the whole account more, well, human.
Right. Okay, so that's Timisoara through Tabori's eyes. Let's shift over to Arad and Karoli Mare Horvath. He starts with history. What does he focus on there?
He gives us this sense of layers. Its possible start as a Hungarian fortress, getting knocked down by Tatars and Turks, its role as a military base. But crucially, he stresses the mix of different ethnic groups who built the city's character over time. He calls it a peculiar conglomeration.
A peculiar conglomeration. I like that. How does that history shape his view of Arad society?
Well, compared to Tabori's Timisoara, Mary Horvath seems to see Arad's identity as being forged by this mixing. He contrasts it with other parts of Hungary where a small nobility dominated. In Arad, he suggests the coexistence of nationalities was the defining feature, maybe a bit more fluid.
More fluid, less rigid, maybe.
Perhaps. He even makes this argument about patriotism, that this mix led to a kind of shared belonging which expressed itself as Hungarian. He points to Germans and Jews fighting enthusiastically in the 1848 revolution.
Interesting. But not everyone.
Right. He does note the Serbian population was more reserved, which is an important nuance. It shows that this inclusive Hungarian identity, if it existed, wasn't felt the same way by all groups.
Still, Mary Horvath calls Arad completely Hungarian, but also tolerant. How does he square that?
It seems his idea of Hungarian wasn't strictly ethnic. It was more about a shared civic culture. And for him, tolerance was a key part of that modern Hungarian identity, especially in Arad. He's maybe presenting Arad as a model,
A model of inclusive nationalism, perhaps?
Something like that. Contrasting it maybe implicitly with places where things were more tense.
And he paints Arad as quite cosmopolitan, a link to the West, lively society, strong economy, banking, industry, trains. He sounds pretty impressed with Arad's vibe.
He really does. He reels off these indicators: banks, industry, railway hub. It sounds like a city buzzing with activity, connected, developing.
What details really bring out this dynamic feel?
Well, the number of banks for its size is telling. That suggests real financial energy. And then mentioning it as a conduit for Western culture, the lively social life, it points to a place that's open, engaged with the wider world.
And the city itself, the buildings, the theater, schools, even a music conservatory.
Yeah.
And infrastructure like phones and trams.
Yeah, he lists all that. The picture is one of progressive development.
Yeah.
A city investing not just in business, but in public buildings, culture, modern amenities. It sounds like a place that's really looking forward.
His overall take seems very positive, relatively equal wealth, progress, good location. He's a real booster for Arad, isn't he?
Definitely. You get a strong sense of civic pride in his writing. He's clearly highlighting what he sees as Arad's successes and its potential.
And then there's that interesting bit about the women of Arad, the local saying about their beauty, which he links to the mix of peoples. Plus, the salon life, judging people on character. What does that add?
It's another glimpse into the social world, isn't it?
Oh.
It suggests maybe a more integrated society where different backgrounds mixed freely, even influencing beauty standards.
And the focus on character over looks in salons.
Yeah, suggests a certain level of social refinement, perhaps, a society valuing something beyond the superficial.
Okay, so we have these two rich portraits, Timisoara from Tabori, Arad from Mary Horvath. If we put them side by side, what common threads pop out?
Well, both writers are clearly thinking about what defines their city. This urban rhetoric is strong. Cosmopolitanism comes up in both, but feels different in each account.
Right, and the whole language and national identity question is central for both.
Definitely. Plus the effects of urbanization, the rise of a middle class, those broader trends are visible in both cities.
And Hungarianization, too, present in both but received differently.
Exactly. In Timisoara, Cabri shows more friction, more complexity. In Arad, Mare Horvath presents it as more integrated into a tolerant civic identity.
And both mention the mix of nationalities, but again, interpret it differently. Tabori sees the divisions more starkly.
While Mary Horvath emphasizes the blending and tolerance, which brings us to that study you mentioned, herbs, text imago. Analyzing these kinds of texts together across disciplines.
Yeah.
What does that help us understand?
Well, it lets us see how these writers were making sense of their cities, doesn't it? They weren't just reporting facts, they were building these mental maps, interpreting urban change through the lens of, Hungarian national ideas of the time.
Right. It helps us decode their perspectives. It's not just what they saw, but how they saw it.
And it's a good reminder that other groups in those cities, Romanians, Serbs, Germans, Jews, they probably had completely different maps, different ways of seeing the exact same streets and events.
Absolutely. These portfolios are valuable windows, but they only show part of the picture. Urban identity is always this complex mix of viewpoints.
So, wrapping up, these 1890 accounts give us these incredibly detailed, nuanced snapshots. Timisoara and Arad, caught in a moment of big change.
Yeah, you see the shared issues of the time modernization, national identity, but also the really unique local flavors that made each city distinct.
They really do illuminate that complex dance between culture, identity, progress, right on the edge of the 20th century.
A fascinating glimpse back.
And maybe that leaves us with something for you, the listener, to think about. How did these observations from way back in 1890 resonate today when we talk about city identity or multiculturalism or how cities changed?
Hmm.
What parts of Tabori's and Mary Horvath's accounts feel surprisingly familiar in your own town or city, and what feels totally different? It's interesting to think about that memory of time and space and how it keeps evolving around us.